YouTube. This is another movie review, and this time it is a fictional movie but based on real life events. And that movie is 2023 The Iron Claw. Now, if you watch the trailer, you might think it's just another wrestling movie, and sure, it is another wrestling movie. I would rate it an 8 out of 10, maybe an 8.5 out of 10. There are some things that bother me about the movie, which I'll get to later on, but it's about the Von Erich family, who were basically like the most popular and over people in Texas for the longest time. And it kind of like, it's a tragedy. It's a story where, a family has five sons in the movie. In real life, they had six. And then they all start dying. The different causes, mostly suicide, but there was one like accidental overdose or GI issue. Anyway, I would definitely recommend that you watch it. It's an 8.5 out of 10. It's very moving. It's just a very moving film that kind of sticks with you. But a little bit about my background with respect to pro wrestling. I started watching pro wrestling in 1992, so I watched some of Kerry's matches, and I watched exclusively the WWF or WWE. And so, I mean, when I was a kid, I was just the biggest mark for Bret Hart, Taker, The Undertaker, and Shawn Michaels. It's kind of weird how you can love Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels at the same time, but they were just both so amazing and amazing in different ways. Bret Hart was just the hero, and The Undertaker was just a phenom, and Shawn Michaels was just flamboyant, and um, he had like a moving moment when he first won the championship. When he's hugging the ring. But I was a huge mark from 1992 until around 2001, or whenever I started high school, and it was no longer cool to watch wrestling. I was there for the entirety of the Attitude Era, when Steve Austin just fucking exploded like a meteorite. He just exploded, man. He just turned babyface, boom. And I think that was a match that involved Bret Hart where Stone Cold turned babyface because he wouldn't tap out. Anyway, that's kind of like my background. Every week, tuning in, USA Network. I never watched WCW. I had friends who would come up to me and say, "Yo, the NWO is so amazing. It's mind blowing." I was like, "No, I don't like watching WCW. I just didn't like the way the ring looked, I think." But during that period, I was mostly a mark, and then I started to realize later on how the business worked. You have baby faces and heels, and the entire point is to get a reaction from the crowd, whether it's positive or negative. And so after I stopped watching pro wrestling, I still followed the wrestlers during my era. So I followed Bret Hart. I was saddened to learn that he had a stroke, and I watched his interviews on the Montreal Screwjob and all of that. And I was mostly a TV watcher. I didn't get to see that many pay-per-views because, my family, when I was growing up, we couldn't afford $60, $70 to watch a wrestling show. So I would catch a lot of those with my neighbor downstairs or what have you. So getting back to the Iron Claw, if you're not a wrestling fan, there's a chance you might enjoy the movie even more just because there are some nitpicks. Generally, it's an amazing movie. The star of the movie is Zac Efron. He plays Kevin Von Erich. Jeremy Allen White plays Kerry Von Erich. And then we have the actor playing David and also the actor playing Fritz. I think the standout is the actor who played Fritz Von Erich. He was just the most convincing in the movie. Now, none of the actors in the movie actually look like their real life counterparts. And so, the casting choices could have been better. I think because of how big Zac Efron got. I mean, he had fucking HGH face and HGH gut. You know, never mind about steroids. Because of how big he is, I thought he would have been better cast as Carrie, who was the Hulk, right? Um, and then you have David, who doesn't look like David Von Erich at all, but he's tall like David, and he's blonde, so I think David Von Erich was like redheaded or had like strawberry blonde colored hair. In any case, the movie is a tragedy. It's about how the family falls to a curse, but they don't like sufficiently describe the curse in the movie. Whereas I think in real life, it was more like based on Fritz von Erich taking a Nazi persona and being haunted by Holocaust victims. So personally myself, I got to watch Carrie a little bit back in 1992, or was it 1991? I can't remember now. It was a Texas tornado, and I remember always having him confused with the warrior. Because they were both, you know, hulking Greek gods, and as a kid, sometimes it's hard to tell the difference. But I didn't learn about the Von Erichs until after I stopped watching wrestling. Um, I think Kerry's earliest match was in like 1978. Kevin's earliest match was, you know, early to mid 70s, so way before my time. Um, and I'm actually you know, not a native, but I grew up in Texas, so it was a different time back then. But in my mind, before I learned about the Von Erichs, I had thought that, you know, Texas wrestling was just Shawn Michaels, San Antonio, Stone Cold Steve Austin. I forget where he's from. Was it, I don't know, no, Lubbock? Definitely not Austin, but yeah, I just didn't know about the Von Erichs. And so I watched the documentary on YouTube about the WCCW, Fritz's promotion. It's an entire like chronologue of the WCCW, and it does reference the deaths of the Von Erich brothers, but it doesn't go into great detail. So there are other videos on YouTube that goes into greater detail. So some of the well, I think the film did a good job of not disparaging pro wrestling. Um, I think a lot of non-wrestling fans, it's difficult for them to understand why pro wrestling fans love pro wrestling so much. Um, and I was a kid, I just loved it. If you were to ask me if I was 6, 7, 8, 9, what I wanted to do when I grew up, is like, I want to be like Bret Hart. I want to, you know, be a pro wrestler. And so, getting back to the movie, it's longer than 2 hours, so it moves at a pretty fast clip. Or it's longer than 2 hours, but the pacing is pretty good. There's one montage of like, you know, the sort of high point, and then after the montage, everything, you know, starts going downhill. Um, there are some nitpicks I have with the movie. Again, none of, you know, the casting choices are questionable, and because they had to downsize everybody because, you know, I think Kevin was like 6'2", and Zac Efron is nowhere near 6'2", but that's not the main issue. The main issue I have probably is the dramatic license that they took. But I guess, you know, they kind of had to in order to fit this into a 2.5 hour movie, or just over 2 hour movie. For example, David didn't die until 3 years after Kevin got married. So the timeline, the chronology is kind of like just not correct. And as well, David and Carrie both had families. David had a wife and daughter. Carrie was married. He had 2 daughters. They ended up divorcing, but, you know, it's not like Carrie's kids were babies. Carrie's daughters, Lacey and Holly, were 6 and 9 years old when he died. So it's definitely a you know, oh shit, daddy's dead, daddy's gone to heaven type of a situation. So I think not including that aspect in the movie kind of is not great for their legacy. Now the movie really like concentrates on Kevin Von Erich, because Kevin Von Erich is, you know, the surviving brother, and it kind of paints Kevin as like the clean one of all the Von Erichs. And I don't think that that's supported by facts. Um, I mean, I've seen shoot interviews with other wrestlers who say that Kevin was just as messed up as Kerry and David, you know, in terms of drugs and stuff. You never see that in the movie. It's never spoken. You see Kerry and Kerry and David doing drugs, injections, snorting, lines of powder and stuff. You never see it with Kevin, which I think they wanted Zac Efron's character just to be likable. So that is a nitpick because nobody's perfect. And the only flaw that Kevin has in the movie is that he legitimately believes his family is cursed. So that's another nitpick. And then another nitpick is, on the business side, they didn't really explain to us what happened with the WCCW and why they left, or why Kerry left for the WWF. They didn't even indicate that Kerry was in the WWF. They just said some other promotion. And, oh my gosh, Ric Flair. Ric Flair is one of the greatest of all time. A little bit before my time, but I got to see him, in WCW whenever I watched WCW sparsely. And, oh my gosh, it feels like they just took some random, like, improv guy off the street, bleached his hair blonde and had him do a really long Ric Flair promo. And, like, yeah, it just doesn't work because you can't emulate Ric Flair. Or if you're going to do it, you got to do it better than what they did in the movie. I mean, the movie's Ric Flair is just really bad. And so I would definitely give it a 8 out of 10 though. It is quite moving. And it's a type of movie also that kind of stays with you for a little bit. Because it's about, family and tragedy and all of that. So, I guess the last thing to say is that, if I didn't already mention this, the movie doesn't really, or the high point of the movie is actually in the wrestling scenes. Aside from the Ric Flair promo, the wrestling scenes were really well shot, and captured, and they were really well trained. I think they were trained by Chavo Guerrero. They were really well trained, Kerry was doing his discus punch and all that. So that's definitely the high point of the movie, is that it looked very authentic. And also, I think Kevin, there's an early scene with Kevin having the first date with his future wife. And she's like, isn't it all fake, pro wrestling? And I think Kevin answers in a very astute way. It's just comparing pro wrestling to any other career. And, getting a belt is like getting a promotion. And it's about getting over with the fans. That's essentially what he tells him, and that's what it is. So, dramatic license, dialogue. I saw Jim Cornette's review of the movie, and he's like, Von Erichs would never say that shit to each other. And I tend to agree, because the dialogue is, like, when I stopped watching wrestling, but I still followed it, I was no longer a mark. I knew about kayfabe and, all of that. And so it's kind of jarring in this film where these guys are portraying actual professional wrestlers, but they're talking as if they're just like wrestling marks, just fans. They never talk about bumps, about selling, all the terminology of pro wrestling. Kevin got slammed down by Harley Race on the concrete. His dad was like, "We just got to take it. It's a test." Well, the scene would have been better if he said, "He's got to take that bump," And if non-wrestling fans don't know what it is, it's not that hard to understand, you know, because they already had a scene with Kevin explaining what wrestling was. And so it would have been a lot more, what do you call it, immersive if Kevin, Kerry, David, Mike, and Fritz talked to each other as if they were actually in the pro wrestling business, in which they would use terminology, just babyface, heel, you know, so on and so forth. Um, so the dialogue is leaves a lot to be desired. It's very kind of PG-13, you know, Disney Snow White. Oh, and back to the Kevin Von Erich thing. Like, there's a scene in there where he has sex with his uh, future wife, right? And it's implied that he's a virgin. Um, I just that's like a really hard sell for me because Kevin Von Erich was the one who was over the most with the ladies, um, probably more so than Carrie, and so it's like, yeah, that scene kind of bothered me because it just felt like they're trying to put a real shine on Kevin, just because he's the surviving family member and all of that and so forth. At the end of the day, though, it's definitely a movie worth watching. I think more movies about pro wrestling should be made. I'd love to see one about Mick Foley. Um, so yeah, uh, definitely worth watching, worth renting for a few dollars or even purchasing it. Um, and uh, kudos to Zac Efron for getting really, really jacked for this movie. I mean, he's jacked. He's got, you know, like HGH face and HGH gut. It's really obvious, but yeah, I mean, that must have not been easy either. So, definitely give the Iron Claw a try. You don't have to be a wrestling fan. However, again, it's a tragedy. It covers a lot of suicides. So, you know, if that's a trigger for you, then don't watch it because suicides can be upsetting. Um, but yeah, the Iron Claw 2023, 8 out of 10. Definitely worth a watch. Thanks.